I am the coach at my go-to doc, and I'm working with Dr. Haider on the Phoenix protocol and also the one-on-one programs. And I'm excited to be on to speak on this weekly live that we have every Thursday to talk about different topics. So this week, we're going to speak about women's health and specifically birth control pills and different side effects that they have and alternatives to that, and maybe some information that you might not know around use of birth control pills. So I'm going to start with my presentation. So, what defines hormonal birth control? So, when we think of birth control, usually we think of just the pill, but there's actually hormonal patches, injections, implants, and IUDs. And there are IUDs which are implanted into the womb, and some are hormonal. Some release small amounts of more localized hormones, and others are just a structure that doesn't release hormones, but it just creates changes in the uterine lining that disallow any kind of implantation to happen. So there's a lot of, I would say, misinformation and maybe confusion around the idea of hormonal birth control, because even the word itself insinuates that it's something natural and that perhaps these hormonal interventions are just resemble in some way our own hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And that's actually not true at all. What happens in the case of hormonal birth control is that your own hormones are essentially switched off along with your ovarian function and any kind of natural hormones, and those hormones are replaced with a steroid drug that resembles estrogen and progesterone, but doesn't actually function the same as our natural hormones at all. And this is problematic for different reasons that we'll kind of go into later. So these are different examples of hormonal birth control. Shot, there's different combination pill and mini pill, which we'll go into, and the hormonal IUD, an implant. Both of these, hormonal IUD and the implant, release hormones into the body, and the patch also. They release hormones into the body, so you don't have to remember to take the pill. Um, it's just happening on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to talk a little bit about what these different methods do and how that's different to getting your normal cycle in the absence of any kind of hormonal intervention. Um, so a lot of one question that, or maybe confusion that a lot of people have when they are talking about when they're thinking about hormonal birth control is, why people will still get a period even if they're on birth control, and how does that work? And actually, this is another a kind of issue with the terminology around these kind of things. So we spoke about the terminology using hormonal birth control pills when they're not actually hormones. And then another problematic terminology use is when we call something a period when it's actually what's known as a withdrawal bleed. So essentially, you are um, flatlining your natural hormones, and then when your body and that those hormones are being replaced with these steroid hormones, these synthetic steroid hormones. And then when you stop taking those, then you get what's called a withdrawal bleed, which is essentially just a withdrawal effect from the steroid drugs. And the pills that you continue taking during the withdrawal bleed are just sugar pills. They're essentially just placebos. And the reason why those are kind of included in the birth control regime is just to reinforce this pattern of taking the pill every day. And I think And researchers found that, if there was this gap of 7 days, then that would leave you more likely to forget to kind of continue. So it just reinforces the habit. But in actual fact, those 7 days, you're just taking a placebo. Um, so this is an image of what I was speaking about in terms of the natural trajectory of hormones. So you'll see here in the top one, this is a natural cycle. And as you'll see, there are many more hormones, but the main hormones, estrogen, progesterone, they rise and fall at different times during a natural cycle. During a combined pill, which is a really common birth control pill that people take, that combines the synthetic estrogen and progesterone, as you can see, there are these sharp spikes. And basically, what those represent are a spike in synthetic hormone that you have every single day when you take it. So, this is every day. And then these blue and orange lines below are basically a flat line. So those are your natural hormones that are, as I said, completely flatlined, and they no longer look like the above cycle. So they're essentially switched off and replaced with this synthetic hormone trajectory. And then here at the end, you have the withdrawal bleed, which is essentially what some people still think of it as a period, but it's actually not, and it doesn't have the same function. Um, so some of the risks of hormonal birth control pill, aside from, so to go into imagine this scenario that I just showed before, I think, to me, this is quite shocking to learn that, this is actually what's happening to your hormones. They're just getting flatlined. And I think it's important to kind of take note that these hormones don't just have the function of regulating our menstrual cycle and pregnancy, but they have many other functions as well, which we'll go into later. But um, they as with a kind of anything in the body, usually one hormone or one nutrient doesn't just have one role; they have multiple roles. So when you switch off, a natural hormone or a natural function of the body, it's going to have knock-on effects beyond just switching off that specific function, which is the reproductive function. So naturally, there are many different side effects of using hormonal birth control. So cancer, blood clots. You can see the statistics here on blood clots, depression. So a study done at the University of Copenhagen tracked 1 million women over 13 years and found that birth control significantly increased rates of depression and suicide, loss of libido, hair loss, weight gain, nutrient depletion. This is also a really big one because often when people go into, let's say, a gynecologist or they're prescribed birth control for different reasons, they're actually not told that birth control pill depletes your body of folic acid, B vitamins, vitamin C, E, zinc, selenium, magnesium. So anyone on hormonal birth control should actually be taking, these vitamins alongside their birth control pill regime, because otherwise you're going to develop a deficiency. Um, and often it can take years for people to actually rebalance this deficiency after they stop taking it if they haven't been keeping up with that. So this is an important, as well as digestive, intestinal inflammation. So one thing, around a million women use birth control around the world. And interestingly, many people actually use birth control for reasons other than birth control. They use it, so 31% of women use it to reduce cramps, 28% to reduce migraines, and 14% reduce acne. And this is unfortunate because, as I was saying, the reason when we're on hormonal birth control pills, they are essentially turning off your hormonal function, And by default, it has these, I would say, like pseudo positive effects of maybe reducing cramps because you're not actually getting a period anymore, reducing hormonal acne because it will reduce the amount of oil that your skin produces. So these kind of seemingly positive side effects are actually not that positive because they're just a result of your hormonal system being shut down. And although those are actually what's happening to people, the risks affected with it are often not really explained clearly by gynecologists or primary care physicians, and they just think that, oh, okay, great, you don't have acne anymore, everything's fine. But it's actually the case that whatever inflammatory condition, let's say gut health issues, let's say hormonal issues, let's say diet, lifestyle, stress, sleep, any of the things that might cause acne go unaddressed. And what's happening is that your skin is just not producing oil anymore in the same quantities, and then therefore you're not getting acne. And the reason why this kind of thinking is quite dangerous is because you never actually get to address the root cause of your problems. They're just suppressed with birth control in the same way that many pharmaceutical drugs just repress symptoms. Birth control pills repress the symptoms of PMS and cramps and all of these kind of negative effects that people associate with the menstrual cycle, but they don't actually treat the root cause. And this can be actually quite dangerous for women because often the root cause goes unaddressed until a woman reaches the years of childbearing years and they decide, oh, I want to go off the pill to get pregnant. And they suddenly realize, whatever the problem was before is now exacerbated because it's been ignored and it's been repressed for maybe 5 or 10 years. And all of a sudden, this issue just explodes into light and is much worse than it would have been. So in this sense, it's best not to be confused with these positive externalities, and think that maybe it means that the hormonal birth controllers are treating the root cause, because it isn't. So this is, yeah, the slide about what I was talking about. It works to suppress oil. Um, And yeah, so this is something I didn't mention. So what will happen is your skin, the birth control pills will tell your skin to produce less oil. So will it will inhibit the production of oil, and then your skin will react to that by upregulating the need for more oil. And then when you go off the birth control pills, then you're experiencing even more oil than you did before, and then that effectively makes the condition worse. So this is one really common thing that happens to people when they go off the pill. Um, so this is something quite interesting that I think Dr. Haider and I have spoken about before. Um, so when it comes to mate preferences, women and men both prefer the opposite sex at different points in the menstrual cycle. So women prefer more masculine, symmetrical, genetically unrelated men. So, the furthest away from your family, essentially, during ovulation compared to with other phases of the cycle. Um, and evidence also suggests that men prefer ovulating women. So, monthly shifts in mate preference have been suggested to bring evolutionary benefits in terms of reproductive success. And now there is a lot of new evidence to suggest that, because we know that hormones have such an important effect in who we choose as a partner and what their aesthetic qualities are, and what that represents about their genes and our compatibility in terms of reproduction. Of course, flatlining and shutting your hormones off will also have an effect on the partner that you choose. So in this study, oral oral contraceptive use in women changes preferences for male facial masculinity. So in this study, it's quite interesting. What they did was they got a group of women, and they were rating on a scale of attractiveness the faces of different men. And through the computer program, they could masculinize or feminize the faces, and then they were able to stop and say which type of face they found the most attractive. And half of those women would go on birth control pills, and half of them wouldn't. And then they would do the test again after several weeks and several months. And what they found was that the women who were on birth control pills would actually prefer a more feminized features than the ones who weren't on birth control, who would just continue to choose the same level of masculinization that they would at the beginning. So there was no change for them, but for the ones on birth control, they preferred more feminized women. And there have been a lot more studies since then this about things like attractiveness level or libido levels in women who got married while they were on the pill, but then went off it, and how that affects how you find your partner attractive, and also how genetically similar our attraction barometer is. So when we're on the pill, we're actually more attracted to people who are more genetically similar to us than if we weren't. There is, yeah, I'm going to skip forward to the book before I go to this. So Sarah Hill, she's my favorite researcher on this subject, and she has a great book called This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. And she talks a lot about these different studies and the implications of this. And yeah, I would recommend checking that out if anyone's interested in this subject more. So as I was doing this research, I actually was quite interested in what kind of I would say mainstream platforms have to say about this subject. So I just had a look on, when you type in Google, is birth control safe, or how does birth control work, or are there risks? You have all of the, let's say, the kind of websites that pop up like WebMD and Mayo Clinic and Very Well Health and Healthline and these kind of platforms. And it's actually quite shocking to see that these are the kind of headlines that you see in most mainstream websites and articles about the pill. And what it mentions, something that's repeatedly mentioned, is that the birth control works by preventing the body from producing an egg and preventing the sperm to fertilize. And it talks about things like making the uterus inhospitable and changing the mucosal viscosity and these kind of things. And there's never any mention of this really important infographic, which I showed you early on, which is the flatlining of the hormones. It never says, well, actually, your natural hormones are being turned off and being replaced by a synthetic version of hormones, which are not the same and don't have the same function. So this is something that is concerning, because a lot of people just are led to believe that that this is maybe somehow natural, or maybe not as bad as the alternative health sphere is making out. And I just don't think there is the proper kind of education around what's actually happening. And when we see sentences like this, birth control helps with irregular, painful, heavy periods, this is just not true. That birth control does not help with PMS or irregular periods or painful periods or any of these conditions. It just turns off your natural hormones, which means that you don't experience the symptoms anymore. But whatever is driving those symptoms still exists. So it's very dangerous to be under this illusion that it's actually creating these benefits, when all it is just taking the red flag away, but whatever is underlying is still there. So again, yeah, I just took some screenshots of these common websites that say that it's safe, and and even even helping to regulate to lessen cramping, lowers the risk of cancer. Um, yeah, and this is quite unfortunate and worrying that this kind of information about just the very basic mechanism of how it works is just not really in the mainstream sphere yet. Um, so this is in addition to, the point that I was making in that estrogen has many functions beyond just reproduction. So it has a role with heart and blood vessels, bones, breast, skin, hair, mucous membranes, pelvic muscles, and the brain. And the same with progesterone. So progesterone um, works in the production of other endogenous steroids, including sex hormones and corticosteroids, and it also plays an important in brain function as a neurosteroid. So when you turn off these hormones in your body, of course, it's like these hormones are there and they're doing all these different roles. They're doing something with bones, they're doing something with skin, something with hair. And when you turn them off, then of course that yes, they're not having the effect of, allowing a pregnancy to happen, but the functions in the heart and blood vessels and the bones and the breast and the hair, all of these functions are also being turned off when you turn those off. So doing that for an extended period of time is really you're going to see a knock-on effect on all of these different functions. So it's important to bear that in mind. Yeah, so this is the book that I mentioned. Um, I think I would like to skip to the other presentation now, just to show you. Let's skip to the other one. So in this presentation, in this document that I made, it talks about the different types of birth control, essentially. So, and then it talks about perfect use and typical use and how effective they are. So as you can see, the pill has a perfect use of 0.3 and typical use of 9%. And then the implant, the injection, the hormonal IUD, they all have slightly different perfect use and typical use. And when we go down, copper IUD, and I can send this to anyone who's interested to look at these more. But I think the point that I wanted to make in this is that I think it's quite surprising to see how, for example, when you look at all of these different methods that exist, it's quite interesting to see that the FAM method, which is the fertility awareness method, has lower risk, even in typical failure. Rather than perfect use in typical use, it's 1.8% effective. And then when you look at the pill is only 9% effective, and the injection is only 6%. So has a failure rate of 6% and 9%. So it's actually more safe and more effective than using the pill or using the injection. But since people are not educated on this, let's say in high school or by their parents or whatever it is, I think that the fertility awareness method has quite a bad aim. And people generally shy away from it as an unsafe option. So going back to the other presentation. So how the fertility awareness method works is generally on these four different factors. So basal body temperature is basically the temperature that your temperature when you first wake up in the morning, and it's before you move around or get up or anything like that. It has to be as soon as you wake up. And generally our temperature will rise by about 0.3 degrees after you ovulate. So this is an indication, if you're tracking it monthly, that you ovulated. And cervical position will change, cervical fluid also changes, and that's something you can measure. And then luteinizing hormone is basically a hormone that peaks 36 to 40 hours before ovulation. So you can actually test that with a urine stick. So you can see here at this point, this is when ovulation happens, and you can see the surge in temperature. And this is a picture just of the basal temperature device that you can use to measure ovulation. And of course, you have to kind of combine these methods because the temperature surge happens after ovulation. And the idea is that we want to know before we're ovulating because that is the most fertile window. So this is why something like this, the luteinizing hormone sticks and the cervical mucus and all of these kind of things need to be used in combination to be really accurate. So these are what the luteinizing hormone sticks look like, and you can see LH is the blue surge, and that will surge directly before. And if you can measure that, that can indicate well that you're going to ovulate in the next 36 to about 40 hours. Um, so yeah, with all of these ways, it's even useful and interesting to do, even if you're not planning to get pregnant, because this. I mean, this is a subject that we could speak about for hours because there are so many ways to optimize your life around your hormonal cycle. So just knowing which phase you're in, you can plan, for example, let's say you have a really important presentation to do at work, or you would like to ask for a promotion, or you would like to be pitching some important project or idea. It's best to choose that during the ovulatory phase when you have a lot of energy and when you're feeling really sharp in your mind. And then, during the follicular phase, we might be in more of a creative or introverted mindset. And, in the menstrual phase, it's the idea of clearing the schedule so that you can rest. And you can also optimize your diet around the cycle. So, different foods have different levels of phytoestrogens. Different foods also allow us to metabolize and excrete excess hormones. Um, we're definitely in need of more high carbohydrate foods just before the menstruation. So we often crave things like root vegetables and like tubers and things like that. And then, of course, on the menstruation, things like meat and things that have iron, um, things like fatty fish to reduce inflammation with a lot of omega 3s. There's really endless ways that you can regulate, that you can kind of track your cycle and then really tailor in what kind of food, what kind of movement, what kind of activities in your personal life, in your work life to address that. So yeah, it's an interesting and useful process to do, even if you're not trying to get pregnant. And I think that is it for the presentation. I think I will see if anyone has any questions. Um, yeah, someone asked, I think last week, if someone asked in response to Laurie Rose's presentation, she asked, if I still limit my carbs to less than 40 grams a day, is it okay to eat fruit? Um, So this question depends on what lens you're looking through, limiting your carbs. Because if someone is limiting their carbs in order to get into ketosis, let's say, or to be keto, then it doesn't really matter what carbs you have. It's just about the quantity that you have. So you could have, one piece of fruit that is less than 40, or you could have, some more low glycemic foods that, add up to 40. But if it's in the case of trying to not feed candida, then yeah, there are some fruits that are more high glycemic and some that are low glycemic. And the more high glycemic and high sugar fruits will definitely feed candida more than the other ones. So if it depends what lens you're asking that question through, but hopefully that answers. Um, so someone asked about a whole food plant-based diet. So I think I've said this to a few of the on the discovery calls and a few people on the clients, on the one-on-one clients. Every all of the protocols that we do, we mainly center it around a primal paleo ancestral health model, and I think Dr. Haider and I are quite aligned on this being the most ideal kind of framework for understanding health, and we've actually made so many videos on this subject, but the idea is that animal foods are the most nutrient dense and the most bioavailable foods that we can get. And I think maybe the simple way in which I um, kind of like to understand this is that animals have a mechanism to protect themselves, which is running away. But once they're caught and once we are cooking them to eat, then their nutrients are immediately bioavailable to us. Whereas plants, they can't run away. So they actually have toxins, and they have um, phytates, oxalates, mineral blockers, anti nutrients in the skin that stop overconsumption. Basically, this is the function of that. So and all the fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds have them in different quantities. But this makes plant foods in general less bioavailable and less nutrient dense. And you can easily look on, any website. You can see the nutrient density of different foods, and animal foods, especially organs like liver, um, things like butter, fish oil. They're all the most nutrient dense things that we can get. So this is why we focus around that. Um, And so, for those of us who've been on the pill for many years, will it be more difficult to get pregnant when coming off the pill? Will fertility be affected? So, some people are really lucky and they come off the pill and everything's fine and they can get pregnant right away. And other people suffer from what's called post pill amenorrhea, which is essentially the loss of period for 6 months or more after taking the pill. And because, as you saw, your hormones are being flatlined, it takes time for your body to learn how to create these hormones again. And, if the reason why you went on them was not birth control related, it was acne or painful periods or whatever it is, it's likely that that issue probably got worse because it was never addressed in the first place. It was just allowed to proliferate and you weren't able to see that it was still proliferating. So it's just a process of kind of addressing, the root cause issues. And if it was just for birth control reasons, then it's just trying to balance your hormones naturally in with all of the lifestyle things we always talk about, like having nutrient dense food, having good sleep, not stress and adrenals are a huge thing when it comes to hormones, because as soon as our body is really really stressed, and this could be like under eating, over exercising, then your body will perceive the environment as inhospitable for bringing a child into the world. So then it will downregulate fertility. So relaxation, lots of nutrient dense foods, eating enough is really important to optimize fertility. And yeah, and I would say, questioning why the need for hormonal birth control interventions when there are just so many other alternatives that don't have any side effects and don't have any risk associated with it. So I would definitely look into those. Um, will fasting affect the cycle? Yes. So actually, we have in the Phoenix Protocol, we actually have a whole chapter on this, and this relates to what I just said, which is that um, when our body kind of recognizes scarcity in the environment, which is often what fasting replicates, then it will down regulate reproduction, and it will just think, okay, I'm in survival mode now. I need to survive. I need to find food. I need to make sure that, I'm alive and it's not important to reproduce at this time. And this is why a lot of people who do excessive fasting actually stop getting their period. And this is something really to look out for if you're a woman. And um, it's interesting actually to see the mice studies on fasting, and you can see that there's a huge difference in the way in which male and female mice are affected by fasting. And a lot of the benefits attributed to fasting are actually only seen by men. And that's not to say that women can't benefit from fasting, but it's definitely a totally different kettle of fish. And you have to really, you know, I think that it could be argued either way whether women in their childbearing years should even really try to fast at all beyond a normal 12, let's say 12, 14-hour fast, which is a totally normal, overnight fast, just having dinner early and then not having breakfast as soon as you wake up. Just making sure that you reach that 12-hour window is always healthy for everyone, but definitely extended fasts, I think, can be contraindicated for people in childbearing years. Um, so every time I exercise more than usual, I feel like the number of days between my cycles increases from 25 to 28 or 29. If this is this a good thing? Um, So I think there's actually a lot of debate on the optimal. I mean, so people talk about 28 as the most optimal, cycle length. So when you say it increases between 28 or 29, that still sounds like a really normal number. 25 is actually slightly short, but again, this is very bio-individual. And if you check out Dr. Jolene Brighton, so my two favorite people who write about this subject are Dr. Jolene Brighton and Lara Briden. And both of those people have a lot of different blog posts and information about what it means if your cycle is slightly long or slightly short, and what that could reflect bio-individually in you. So I would definitely recommend checking those out. But yeah, 20, if you said it went up to, let's say, 35 days, that is quite long, but 28 or 29 is really a fine number. And um, I think that, when we talk about exercise, the main thing to kind of watch out for is just missing periods, because that's how you know that you can that you've kind of overdone it and you've stressed your body out too much if you skip a period. So, what can we do to improve menopausal symptoms? So again, actually, Laura Briden has an amazing new book that's just about menopause. Um, what I'll do is I'll link it with Julia in the show note in the comments section. And yes, definitely, hot flushes can be mitigated with diet and different supplements. And you know, I don't know. I don't think. No, I can't. I want to do another section on this because there are actually specific nutrients that are associated with different symptoms. So let's say you always have PMS before a period. There are certain nutrient deficiencies associated with that. And then if you always have hot flushes, if you always have migraines, if you always have acne, there are different kind of, let's say, groups of nutrients that you can associate with these different symptoms. And in that way, you can kind of reverse engineer some of your issues. So I think I will do that in the next one, because it's kind of another whole subject. But definitely, yes, to answer your question, you can mitigate the hot flushes, and I would recommend checking out Laura Bryden's book about that. Okay, I'm 41 and my periods have changed over the last couple of years. It used to be 28 to 30, now it's 23 to 24. Um, Bleeding last 2 days, but are really heavy. Is this normal for my age? So actually, normally during like as we go to premenopause, the periods actually increase in the menstrual cycle actually increases in length rather than decreases. So I would say it's quite unusual. And also for sure, heavy bleeding is unusual. So I would take any kind of changes to the menstrual cycle as an indication of something going on. And this is the one of the great things about being a woman compared to a man. It's almost like the menstrual cycle is sort of a report card, let's say, that you get every month. You know, you find out if you didn't eat enough and you exercised and then your period came late, or you missed it, or you ate a lot of inflammatory food and that meant you had a lot of bloating and a lot of acne. You know, it's a really great kind of report card that our body gives us every single month. So if you have, you know, really heavy bleeding and less days, then this would definitely reflect something about what's going on in your hormonal sphere. And yeah, again, I'm going to say check out Laura Brydon's Period Repair Manual and her book about menopause, because she lists every single symptom and every single you know, possible thing that happens, and then she breaks down how to treat it with different nutrients and diet, and also functional testing. So you know, there's a great hormonal test called the Dutch test, and in that test you can measure your hormones over the month. It's actually a urine test, so you create a urine sample on a test strip every day for a month, and then it will track the trajectory of your cycle rather than just on a one-off day, which is not useful at all. And then in that way you can tell, you know, which hormones are elevated and how the hormones are metabolized, and how they are in relation to each other. And that's also a really interesting thing to do if you have any kind of hormonal issues. So I think that is it for the questions. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. And I think maybe next week we'll go into more depth about specific issues, like what do I do in the case of pain? What do I do in the case of migraines? Because there is interesting, you know, things to do to mitigate that. And I will, all the books that I mentioned, I will let Julia know and she can post in the comments. So thanks everyone. And I'll see you again next week.